Good afternoon and welcome to today's CLC lecture, Resilience, Beauty and Common Sense, Dense Urban Landscapes in Turbulent Times. My name is Naufal and I'll be your MC today. The CLC lecture series is organized by the Center for Livable Cities as part of our mission to distill, create and share knowledge on livable and sustainable cities. Today, we are delighted to have Mr. Herbert Dreiseitl, artist, landscape architect and urban designer for regenerative water-sensitive cities. He'll be sharing successful international case studies to explore how we can nurture livable, regenerative cities in times of social and environmental challenges. The format for today's lecture will start off with a presentation by Herbert Dreiseitl, followed by a short sharing session by the moderator and panelists, followed by a panel discussion before a question and answer session with the audience. The discussion and Q&A session will be moderated by Mr. Wong Summ, founding director of WOHA Architects. Kindly hold all questions till the Q&A session. Thank you. And with this, let us start the session by inviting Mr. Dreiseitl on stage. Herbert, if you may.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and thank you very much for the interest. It's actually my honor to be here and to share with you a little bit an insight what we mean by resiliency. And I would like to, before we go into this question about resiliency, beauty, and common sense, I would like to show you very personal, from my life, my experience, how I became a landscape architect and an artist, and what I think is so important for young people and also for teams. What is our motivation to do good work, also in Singapore, but also around the world? What is our motivation to be really sort of challenging ourselves, to be always forward thinking, not just to fulfill duties or KPIs, but beyond that, how can we create a city or an environment and in a partnership with a city where we actually already have ideas for the next 10, 20 years, what might be the challenges which are confronting us and next generations? How can we prepare ourselves and our cities to be addressing these challenges and actually reacting to this? This is what I mean with resiliency. What I would like to do at the very first beginning, I show you a short film done by one of my students who is also now working in one of our studios in Rumble Studio Dreiseitl here in Singapore. And maybe we just start with the film. I will talk to the film a bit. Can we just start it? Let's see how it works. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, just let it go. So this is a film of a little studio I did, and maybe the sound we have to take a little bit louder. Okay. This is a workshop.
So the wave structure like this goes up here,
goes
in, rolls in, slower, smaller, and then it rolls out. Small, and then bigger, and out. That's the movement you need for that.
So here I do starting with imagination, with thinking.
This kind of exercises to make drawings and to think about it and also to kind of meditate fluid thinking. It's almost like you can see this is not the paper or this which really matters. It's yourself, inside yourself. How do you actually think?
With these exercises now, you see that people basically start to get into water movements with their whole body, to actually see movements of wave structures, and then they start to draw it. They bring it on paper, and now they start to look very carefully to water experiments. What is water showing us of change process?
How this water is going up, and there is a kind of turbulence area here.
I can actually even see some of my students here in the room who were joining this workshop.
And this is a rotation which is starting here slow and getting faster and faster. And it's so fast that the water from the eccentric forces is starting to be pushed out.
So students now make their own experiments with how is water moving, what is the energy of a vortex, what is when you put color into it, what are the inner structure of movements, how is water reacting?
Water is very, very strong, interactive. It tries to bring different elements together. There's always a language between earth and water, between water and sky. And also, if you have two sides of water which is separated, the way how they interact, if you look at this from a design point of view, they kind of speak a language.
So actually, I think for all planners, it is very important to get a basic understanding, not on computers, but on reality. What is happening?
Transformed on both sides.
And now I just end this, you will see at the end, a little, we start to model in clay a river system. So students are all starting with, basically with clay.
The river actually, you know, is sort of carving out here and building up here, yeah? Water, go!
Okay, I think we just see a little bit more, and then so we work with color experiments. We see how water actually is streaming backward. How you see, now we can go back to the slides. So basic learning about real experience. This is what I want to focus here. The real practical experience on observing phenomena which are in real life, in real time, in reality in front of you. That creates a kind of understanding what, for example, resiliency is. I would like to go here with some more slides now into some of the details. Is it working forward? No, it's not. Okay. I have to tell you a little bit of secret. When I was a boy, I did a lot to play with water. And one little experiment I did, I had a bicycle. I did put the bicycle on the road on a pedal, and I was starting to go with the bicycle, and the bicycle was turning and spraying the water out. So I was looking how this bicycle is like a pump, bringing water from A to B until the pedal was actually empty. Or I also did one thing at a farm. So I used, you know, from a kitchen, something to put on a top, on a pot, and I blocked an underpass, I have to say. And after a while, the pressure was so high that as a small boy, I couldn't get it off. So what happened, the water was getting higher and higher, and it flooded really a lot of the place until the farmer came, was very angry with me, took it off, and I learned, okay, water can be dangerous, but water behaves in this way. That was a very important experience. It was actually, it was a kind of learning which was very informal. It was not a playground. And I think that, you know, kids often in the past had the opportunity to play outside, to experience things very, very surprisingly, not planned, but often unplanned in a very interesting way. For example, playing in mud. What children in a city can still have that experience? But some of the older ones of us probably know how joyful it could be and how important it is, this experience. Of course, it is a lot of arguments that you can say it is maybe not so safe from an infection and all this, but it doesn't matter because you can actually, we all did survive, and some of our older generation actually had their most enjoyable experience on this. What I would like to point out, often resiliency, when we learn about resiliency, is often the unplanned, often the things which surprise us, often things which are also so that we cannot always know exactly the result which comes out. It creates a kind of creativity in us how to react to surprising things. And I think that is a very important part of our human life and of our human culture of planning. I will come back to this. When we look at nature, how nature actually works, we can see nature is actually reacting to change of climate, to actually also in a natural, not by a man-made climate change, but also by rain and dry seasons. It always reacts to that, and we can learn how change process and resiliency in nature actually comes up. And it's therefore very important that when we talk about resiliency or when we talk about testing things out, how cities react, that we understand what flexibility and resiliency is. I do this very often with teams, with studios, with students, and even you see here people from the now called Ramble Studio Dreiseitl, working with clay on rivers. These are all people from our teams. Or going out, just what you have outside here of Singapore, just to look when the tide goes down, how the water structures look on a coastal area, on sand. What is the flow? You see here pictures actually of the very early team we had here when we started, before we started Bishanamokyo Park, or parallel to this, to study a little bit outside. And I even took the team to do a snorkeling and diving tour. And I have to tell you, 50% of the team who were grown up here in Singapore have never looked into the ocean. They have never had a snorkeling. So some of them, it was for them the first time actually to take a snorkeling and look down and see the beauty you have just around Singapore. I think understanding, this kind of dynamic and flow structures and flow patterns are extremely important for us planners to understand scales, small scale, large scale. This is actually a vortex street after a mountain which is reaching out of a cloud formation, and in the flow shadow of this you have the vortex street for many kilometers long, for 300, 400, 500 kilometers. The same you can see with a little grass reaching into a little stream. You have the same phenomena. So scale and structures are often very similar on large and small scales, and we can learn from that. I always like to look at things very simple, like a drop. What happens if a drop of water falls into a vessel? You have first a ring vortex. When you make a photo from below and you put some color into this drop makes this kind of forms and shapes. And what you see here is that after a while this ring vortex starts to have structures. And the inner structures, which we usually cannot see, but only if we put color into it, we can see there is enormous organization in water movements. And they almost look like plants or flowers. And you can see very early forms of life are very related to movements and to forms, which we also find in water. Then after a while, you need very special conditions to see it, because it happens all the time, but we cannot see it. And then finally, it starts to delete and to goes out. So we can actually see, even in a drop, how a drop reacts. There is enormous resiliency in nature, and there's of course always connected to that a very special beauty. The beauty is for me very important, because I think it's a driver also to keep things in a good standard or in a good shape also in the city. I started with very small experiments, working on very small scales of water phenomena, of working with different elements of steam, of working with metal. My early work as an artist was really going into the sphere of creating sculptures, which are always related in a way to the environment and to water. For example, steam and wind and solar energy for the turning of that. That is one in Finland. Working in very cold climate zones with ice and freezing structures of water sculptures. This one is in Bern in Switzerland. Or working in one of my hometowns to avoid the traffic noise and creating a kind of barrier filter with a fountain like a membrane which can have light in the evening. Water and light, water and different materials, water and air, water and temperatures is enormous rich on beauty, on forms. So I was fascinated about working also with light and reflection and also sound, and how to bring sound into movement and into reflection. So some of my early work I would like just to present here, and then I will go to some more deeper questions about what does it mean for people, was always surrounded about how can I make very special places in cities where the observation of a natural phenomena can be brought to people through art. So these are installations with sound and with light, and they changed the whole place. Restaurants, cafes were having 30 to 40% more turnover because it was an attractive, interesting space which created a kind of momentum of attraction also in the evening and changed completely the place. Before it was a bus stop here. Well, I would like to come up here with a cut and I say, why are we doing certain things in cities? Why do we bring beauty or certain experiences in? I would like to share with another very personal experience. Before I was starting to work as a landscape architect and as a designer, I was working for 4 years in a special place for drug addicts. So people who were addicted to morphine and heroin, basically junkies. In my cities, we had a lot of GIs from the US coming back from the Vietnam War. So we had this drug problem, something you luckily don't have in Singapore. But in many cities, that's a big problem. How to make a change actually for young people who are getting into that? And you know, this is a very, very hard scenery because when you get to know these people and when you get very intelligent young people who are drug addicted and you understand what is actually behind, it's very often reasons in their personality, it's reasons of their family, but very often they feel there is no connection between my inner world and my outer world. No one loves me. I'm not loving the environment. I'm disconnected. I'm on this planet as a foreigner. That is a very, very serious problem of our society. We often have also without drugs, that we are lonely, that we have depressions, that we are not feeling connected to the society and that we are not feeling connected to the environment. So how to make a change? A very important experience for me was, in this kind of societies, was how can you make a change? The change was, and still is in this hospital, to bring people who are drug addicts to nature and to very basic experiences. One, for example, this is called the Seven Draws place, Sieben Zwerge in German. You go to a place and you milk cows every morning at 6 o'clock. Very hard for drug addicts to get up at 5 and to start to milk cows. Actually, they would not do it if you tell him, please do it. But if you make a relationship to the cow, this guy is falling somehow in sympathy to this animal and knows the animal needs him and I need the animal. There is a kind of symbiotic relationship. And by that taking care of these cows, these people slowly get a rhythm getting up at 5 to milk the cows at 6 o'clock. And many more things. It's creating kind of a connection to the environment, bringing back the basic connection to the environment and feeling that I am connected to something which is more than just myself. Something I think in our dense cities is really a very big challenge. And I just mentioned some things. Aging population, older people, many people when they lose their social networks because people die, are having this phenomena of feeling totally depressed and being lonely. How to connect? A very important part, and I think Singapore is doing this very well, is finding that our elderly people are really having opportunities to go out, to see green, to be connected, to move as long as they can, so that their ability to really feel part of the environment and not be isolated is encouraged. There's a very important psychological component, and that is one, for example, of Vijayanamokia Park as well. I think there are a lot of research done on that, why it is important to go out. There's more and more things coming now from a psychological side, research, forest bathing, for example, in Japan and many other places, biophilia effects. And it's basically starting from a very basic moment. This is one of my friends and also a former co-worker and also student of mine who actually created, Katrin Schmiele, who is also sitting somewhere here. She started a company called Touch Green instead of Touch Screen, right? Bringing people really into the environment and kids and children to really touch and to experience things outside. How is it if you lay down and you look up and you see the trees and all the life of animals up there? How is it if you start to do something with new ways of creating forms of energy, solar gardens, solar energy in schools and so on? I think there's hope. There's a lot of new initiatives also of young generations of architects and planners who take that up. And I just take one little example, Chris Pecht, who's starting from Austria and China to come up with new ideas of structures where housing and gardening and urban farming is connected. A lot of these ideas are still very much in the air, but I think this is the direction, that we more and more bring the environment and our living more close together. There are many forms. Now I will take one because I will also have with Summ later the conversation, so I will take your wonderful example here from Singapore, where in this project actually really not only the environment comes in, but also the different generations and the need what people have from a social and cultural point are connected. Young people and old people come together. People who have special needs of care are coming together. Shopping is here. Education is coming together. Old people's home living is there. And still the environment is very strong integrated. I think this is very much the future. And I'm very proud to be also here always in Singapore, seeing what is going on, what are the next steps, the next generations. But I really, beside being proud, you know, that we do a lot about performance, about that we do better things, I would like to focus today very much, it's more than just fulfilling duties and KPIs. It's very much about how can we create a next generation in our society who really sees this is common sense. This is something we need to do just for the future, for our next generations, for our grandchildren, to give them hope, to give them perspective that our planet and our generation actually can go for the future. I think there are wonderful examples, and I will stop here. I go to another point, because this is something where resiliency, and I think the whole question how we deal with this question about that we do more than just KPIs. We have to get the population and everyone on housing and on the road on board, also into the creation process. So I think co-creation is an extremely important part for the future. I know CLC is trying hard to come up with also new projects, and we're discussing certain things. So that's why I want to bring that in here. It needs a certain trust that you cannot control everything, that you have to give the freedom that people have maybe different ideas or bring it forward. The frame has to be very clear. The expectations have to be very clear. What can be done, what cannot be done. But if you do it right, you can be extremely successful. I show you one example. I did work in the city of Portland, sorry, Pittsburgh also, but Portland, where I had 300 citizens from the surrounding coming together, working on a public participation and involvement process, but very much with a co-creation process where I started with creativity first, before I come to actually solutions and also plans and drawings. I started to do the same thing what I did with my drug addicts. You know, I started first to do drawings and exercises of movement, looked at water experiments, opened their fantasy. Because when you do involvement of public, often people come and complain. Or they want just to defend something where they say, okay, I always had my car beside me and my car parking on the street, so how can I actually make sure that this is actually for the future? That's boring. Maybe the next 20 years, the world will totally change. We need a completely different kinds of mindset about how to imagine future. So you have to open people for this, being ready for a kind of, to have the courage to go outside of the box and to think different. And to do that, you have to prepare that. And then you can do a fantastic workshop. Well, we had very successful workshop here. We had very strong support from the public. We created actually a public park. I just show this one here in a very industrial site. We recycled by the idea of people the local materials. This is train tracks 100 years old. We recycled them, we used them in our studio. to come up with ideas to create little species of animals which are now lost, to bring them back into a park, now as ingredients in glass. Portland is a very famous city for glass production. So we recycled the old steel and the new glass. We created this as a part of the park, and the whole park is now actually a retention and detention facility where, like we do with the ABC guidelines, collect the water, treat it, and still having a park which is very people-friendly for contemplation, for bringing them back. And what we basically do is also what we try here with the ABC guidelines. I don't need to explain them. I think everyone knows now what that is. To bring the water from all the different sites, from streets, from boardwalks, into the park, filter it, slow it down, clean it, bring it either into the ground or bring it out into the river. So we delay, we clean, and we have finally clean water coming into the public realm and stream system. This can be done in a way that I think always people have to be on board. It's not a technology somewhere hidden behind a concrete wall or in a tank. It can be so much more integrated into our daily experience. And I think that's so important. So here in Portland, there are many times during the Saturdays, often art performances or little theaters. So they use it. They even have a volunteer group taking care of the park. And the city has very little maintenance work for that. Well, I think there's so much more what we can do to bring blue and green together and to bring social activities together. I just mentioned very quickly just some few points. One is on quality, one is on quantity, how to use ABC water structures and water guidelines. I think if you look up ABC water guidelines, you find a lot of such solutions if you don't know them already. And I will just summarize a little bit what the strategic plan is, because I think this is a very important part that it can be done so much more in Singapore. I'm sometimes thinking, you know, we did big steps, but sometimes I feel we could do more. And so I would like to encourage you, because I think you're a lot of planners here and architects and so. We could starting from the rooftop. And I think the rooftop gives so many opportunities. You know, rooftops can be used in many different ways. Not only green roofs, but rooftops where things can be done, where you can actually, like here in Basel, the urban farmers producing salads. There can be bees on the rooftops, like we do in Chicago or in Berlin. It can also be done in Singapore. Actually, people are a little afraid of bees. It's not dangerous. Bees are wonderful. They bring you honey, and they're not sticking, you know. So I think the biophobia in Singapore is a problem because people are disconnected often to the environment. I think we have to bring that back. And I'm really so proud about some of my colleagues, you know, how green and nature and building in a very dense city, there are new types of prototypes and models, and where we go. I think this was 20 years ago, impossible to imagine, and it's going all around the world. I mean, it's happening on rooftops in many different places in different ways. I don't want to give a talk about rooftop design and opportunities. I think you got the point on this, just some slides. Surface. Resiliency on structures on the surface. A park is not just green to look at. It can do things. It can function to hold water back, to let water filter, to evaporate, to have a cooling effect, to have a shade, to have even filtration of air. And it can be done in many different ways so that the landscape in a city is a performing place which can be very different when it's raining or when it's not raining. I mean, you have that in Singapore with Bishan Am Mo Kio Park in one example. There are many others where we can hold back when there's a lot of storm or rain. And actually the Kallang River is a kind of retention facility and also is trying to clean up. And we have a lot of animals and wildlife coming back. You probably have seen that in many publications, not only the fish otters, but many, many birds and many species coming back into the city. There's also a lot what we can do in the underground. I think that's a a big part. I don't want to go too deep into that, but what can be done in different layers, not only above, but also below, is probably for the future a lot of opportunities. A very early example, and just I take very quick examples here, is storage of rainwater, storage of grey water, recycling of grey water on district levels, here like Berlin, Potsdamer Platz, where we collect all the water from the whole district in the year 2000. Or a new one here, a play area on a school. When it's raining a lot, we have a detention and retention facility which can be flooded, and when there's no rain, it can be used again to play. So this kind of treatment train of the ABC structure here in Singapore makes absolutely sense. It is copied in many other cities, and I would really like to encourage you, not only PUB, who is doing a great job, but also all the other agencies and also the private sector, really to take up and to pick it up and really bring that forward, because that's, I think, a very important part to survive for the future. And what Singapore is doing right is not only for Singapore a good solution, it's also for many other Asian cities very much needed. I just do a studio for Jakarta with my students, and I think some of my students I even have seen here. Well, there are lots of examples about how to bring the blue-green infrastructure into the city. I take the JTC Cleantech, the Eco Park as one example. And the key point is also here, and we have that in Singapore in many places, to bring beauty into the city and function into the city, and that is not only making a nice design to look at, but really to perform and to do things. I give a last example here on a German city called Offenbach, where we started work on a very industrial site on a harbor which was high pollution. And the key point is here really to start with the environment and with the landscape first. Often we do the mistake, we do first the buildings and the road structures. And then when there's some space left over, we squeeze some green in, and if there's some money left over, we put some trees in. I mean, that's not so much the case anymore, but it's still a little bit our mindset. So we have to change that, and that's the only way to really make things successful. Now, I finally come to the very basic experiences and basic needs. I don't want to go into large-scale solutions. I want to go to a very personal experience. It is so important. I give you this example. Last Saturday, I was actually on this crossing over the Kallang stream, and I was talking to one grandfather. Usually, I don't say who I am. I'm just saying, you know, do you like that? And he said, yeah, I really like this very much because this reminds me to my old childhood. And I'm so proud to bring my grandchild here and show him what really water is, that he can touch it, that he can see the fish here, that he can wash it. And then this little one was playing for at least a half an hour. I showed him a little bit, you know, how water is streaming, where there's a little vortex where it disappears. So it is so important that we really bring back this basic common sense experience to our next generation. And I like to end with this little one here. You know, we engineers do a lot of learning and OS and other places about retention and detention things, you know, about we make all the calculations and all this kind of stuff we need to do. But this boy, for about 5 or 10 minutes, did enjoy so much with his body to lay down and to block the water and to see how it comes up. And then he was standing up and he was looking how it's running down, he was laying down. He did learn in 5 minutes what I like to teach my students for a whole semester. You know, what is happening with retention and detention, and how can you actually work with this kind of elastic or resiliency, even with your own body, to experience that. And I think with that, I would just like to come to the end. I'm, of course, very connected to a lot of groups, also to my old company, which is now part of Rumble Studio Dreiseitl. I'm working a lot here in Singapore with my wife, now for more policy making, more for research, also teaching, and I'm very happy to join the next conversation we might have. I think I'm okay with timing, yeah? Okay, so Summ, it's us now. Okay, thank you. Just let this little boy here.
Thank you, Herbert, for the wonderful film on water flows and the presentation on how cities could be made more resilient and beautiful by learning from nature, capitalizing on ecosystem services, and co-creating these ideas together with communities. Okay, soon Mr. Wong will be opening up the floor for questions after the panel discussion. So we will appreciate if you could hold your questions till after. During the Q&A, please state your name and organization before asking questions or making comments. You might like to raise your hand and our staff will walk to you with the handheld mics. So without further ado, Herbert and Summ, if you may.
Herbert, thank you for this introduction and your lecture. And I think I did promise we'll have a conversation, so we'll probably keep it quite light. I think what was really, I've been noting some points, but I just kind of want to get the sequence of your career first. You were obviously playful when you were a kid. And then did you become an artist first, or you became a landscape architect first? Which came first?
I think first came the artist.
Ah, so you practice art. Did you study art?
No, I did study art, but not in a conventional way. I was at different schools, and I was basically following always my interests. When the school was boring, I was stepping out, and I was doing something else. Okay. So I was not going to the normal traditional career. I was always following something. When I had no interest, when I felt this is not really interesting and it doesn't bring me forward, I stepped out and I did other things. But I did start with art first.
So you study art and then you move on to landscape architecture?
Yes, right.
Okay.
So my first projects were really art projects, but I figured out an artist is also very often egocentric, only looking in his art, his gallery, his career, and I was more interested that art is reaching out and doing something for the society, working with prisoners and working with drug people. And I used art as a kind of momentum of change.
So it was after art that you went into rehabilitation of drug addicts?
Yeah.
Was that the
Yes.
sequence?
Yes.
And then after that you became a landscape architect?
Yeah, and then I said the environment is so important for people. How can I not only repair something, but how can I make it better so that people don't get in all these problems? You know, because I think a lot of the mental problem we have is the way how our society and our cities are organized today.
I think that sequence of being a kid and a child and going to art and then to the drug rehabilitation, it kind of explains a lot about you, and I think that becomes a little bit clearer to me about your person and your character. And I think I noted down a few key words as you were talking, and the first one was do good, and I think that is essentially something I think is important in design for me. And I think for you as well, that design should do good. And I think that certainly comes across in all your work. I think for me, one of the most important thing about the Bishan project and success of it, and I think was actually, for me, it was to create a mindset change in Singapore. And prior to that, we all say, don't go near the water, you know, and don't, you know, the drains are drains and concrete. But here, I think it just completely overnight changed the mindset of Singapore. That was such a wonderful moment for Singapore, I think, and I do appreciate that.
You know, it's just to give a comment on that. I mean, it's a hard work to change mindset, also in ourselves.
Yes.
And at Bishan Am Mo Kio Park, we still had about 6 weeks or 4 weeks before the opening, there was still a discussion going on if we should make a fence on both sides. Because really, it was, and I was so angry about this, but I understood it, the fear of that anything is risky was so strong that imagine we would have the fence on both sides, how that would look like.
And
Seriously?
I think, yes. And the other word too that I jotted down after do good was forward thinking. And I think that's something to, while it may not be apparent about the work being forward thinking, for me, it really is about the future of the planet, that we need to respect the planet and go back to more natural ways. And I think that is that comes across for me very strongly in your story about the drug rehabilitation, and that through explaining or through conveying codependency with the drug addicts, you bring them back to society, and I think that's so powerful. And extending that to us as human beings, having to coexist with Mother Nature is so important. And I think particularly in Singapore, where we live in a very dense city, we tend to not consider nature as much, or that we have lost touch with nature, that it's so important for us to be constantly reminded about that.
You know, maybe just to give you a little reflection on this point. If you experience people who are in a situation where they only have a half a year to live, from their life expectations, what people tell them, if you continue, you will have a half a year to live. And if you're confronted with that, you see this, and you see also people who are almost having, you try to avoid that they do suicide. And then if you can actually give them a little seed of hope and change, and I know some of these people who are now actually even teachers or do other things in the society, very stable. You can see how change actually can actually happen in personals. And I think if you look on the planet, I mean, we have so many reasons to give up. You know, I mean, if we think about our CO2 emission and our, you know, COP21, I was in Paris for that conference, and when I see all the governments, what we do, how little, and you know how lazy we are actually to do our homework around the world. There are so many reasons that we have to say we have to give up. But actually, I think that's the end. We should not give up, and I think even if we see a little chance, we have to take it, and that needs passion. And I think that's probably what brings also us a little bit when I look at your work, and when I look at my life, that's actually what is the driver. It's not KPIs, it's actually what are we convinced, and what do we want to leave to the next generation.
I think that is the essence of it. I think it's actually commitment. And I think of late, I get sort of panic attacks. Panic attacks that the world is indeed coming to an end within my lifetime. Yeah. And that it is true. I mean, we always thought that it would be not within our lifetime, but the next generation. But the way things are growing, I think it possibly we could see, if we are not careful about it, we will actually see it, the world coming to an end within our lifetime. Actually, it's not the world coming to an end, it's just human race coming to an end. Yeah. Because I think the world is actually more resilient. I think the world will be better off without human beings. Yeah. The world will recover much faster. And I think that is the reality and the truth about it.
In one way, yes. In one way, yes. Yeah. But I think it is, still, I think the human race has created so much, you know, things which are deeply impressing me, you know, like artwork, or like, you know, I love to be also have to say, in other cities, not only in Singapore, like in Vienna. I'm a lot in Vienna, and I love really good music, good concerts, and that is actually what humans brings up. And when I just see my grandchildren, you know, how they start to come up with first art exercises, I'm so surprised what humans can do. So I still have hope.
And just to mention, I think you do a very good Jane Fonda exercise video too. Didn't get it.
Yeah, I would actually, you know, with this film, I give you one example on that. I actually would love to do such things much more.
Yeah.
But actually, we are both teaching at NOS, but it's not only NOS, it's all the universities. What the problem is in our whole studies is that we only sit in front of computers.
Yeah.
that we just have we do one studio at the moment together, and everything is about computer graphics, about presentation. It's very rare that we bring our students to reality outside. And I think that's also one thing. I'm always thinking we have to change it. And these water experiments I did in one water lab, which
actually, that was quite impressive.
Yeah,
actually,
but this lab is not existing anymore because the NOS could not afford anymore to keep that going because no one else from the faculty was using this space. I was the only guy who was using it. The others always want to sit only in classes and do computer graphics. So that's also, you know, a kind of question and challenge, you know, what we do. Well, we have some people also, I have to say, from NOS who are very practical. I just see one here sitting in the third row who's actually also working on real models and you know, things, bringing technology and real things together. I'm not against any technology. I use a lot of 3D printing and such things, you know, I love it. I think that's great. But this link about the real world, I think, is missing.
I think that's the, I think we, again, we are sort of losing touch with nature. And I think that's quite an acute problem in Singapore, I think. And I think there's also a tendency for, I think, in my opinion, Singapore to be unaware of what reality is outside. And I always tell people that Singapore should take a holiday in Dhaka and they will get a dose of reality. Actually, the other words that I were quite sort of struck with was structure, whether it's in form, scale, geometry, and then it came to the idea of beauty. And I think that is something, for me, an interesting topic, because the reality of all design, there is some sort of structure.
Yeah.
And structure is beautiful. And I think maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's also a very important topic to me because often we think, you know, beauty just comes somehow by chance, but it has very much to do with logic. It has very much to do with very precise research and bringing things together. And you can do on one side, you can look at nature, how beauty actually in nature appears. There is a very precise structures in plants or in animal forms or in flowers and so on. There's a kind of almost inner mathematics secret behind that. And snow crystals or what I just showed on water, you know, these are actually research projects I did with them. I was always happy to work with Max Planck Institute in Germany on flow dynamics and was always working on research. So I bring art and research together, not to be just a dreamer, but to be really on facts. But I think the topic about structure and proportions and logic in structures is something always for me very important in my work and also in the logic about how to come up with good design ideas. And let me just say one or two more words about the beauty, because beauty was up to, I would say, 5 to 10 years, a total taboo in the design field. You know, if you talk about beauty, you say this guy is old-fashioned. This is totally subjective, what he believes is beauty, because for me, beauty doesn't exist. It was actually totally ignored. It's interesting that in the last 5 years, actually, this topic comes into the modern design and discussion. There's just at the moment a very interesting exhibition by Kármánsche in Vienna about the importance of beauty. And there are it's not just a subjective thing which is an add-on. It has to do with a very logical and very clear kind of inner rule, what is the best structure and the best proportion to be most efficient, and how does it perform in nature. And actually, if this is in an ideal proportion, we see this is beautiful. There's a kind of inner sense we have. And it's interesting, Kármánsche, they made research all around the world about all different races. And whatever language you have, whatever background you have from your DNA, they all had the same distinguished, they could distinguish very much what is beautiful and what is not beautiful. and it was always very much on this question about structure, form, optimization of things, and inner rules about what is actually functioning best.
I think Singapore hasn't progressed as much. I think the word beauty in design and in architecture is still very much taboo. I have never ever presented a design and say, I want this because it's beautiful. It has never happened that way. That's the reality. And the reality about also all the...
But your things are beautiful.
Yeah. But when I did the Park Royal and Pickering and WOHA and hotel, all those landscaping was not talked about as in the terms that we talk about it today. I had to explain it as a unique selling point that will make them money. You know? It was simple as that. And I said, you really want to differentiate your product, you go this way. And it would actually get you higher room rates. And that was the only way we could smuggle in ideas about system thinking, about greening and living, the ecosystem that it brings with all those things. So it's unfortunately, even myself today, I find it hard to actually use the word of beauty in our architecture, and that is tough. And,
okay. And that's why I wanted to bring that also in here. And because everything is measured on money, that's an interesting point where there might also be the key for turning. Because what we value, which has value in money, is so short-minded often that we forget about lots of things which actually bring even more value, but we don't count it in the right way.
Yeah, I've always been quite brave to say that Singapore is the first world city in a country, but we behave like a developing country.
I don't comment to this.
Isn't it? The other one that I think the last few words that I thought was an interesting one for me is co-creation, and that it was important to create the framework rather than to define too much the KPIs.
Yeah.
And I think we went through a morning session of workshop that was precisely what not to do. Was trying to actually define KPIs rather than to design the framework. Yeah, maybe you want to talk more about that.
Yeah. I mean, this is of course KPIs are helping, I think, our society in general to have a kind of common ground where we want to move. But I think it only gets to a certain extent on the road. It gets to the next cross section. Then we are lost with KPIs. Because I think really working about common sense and values we create in our human life, where we see, this is actually what is important for us, that really is a much better driver. And
I'm actually very curious, since Ting Chai is here as well. And he was the boss, and you were the one who proposed Bishan. How did you actually manage to convince PUB then? I'm absolutely curious about that.
I mean, that was...
We should bring Ting Chai here and he should talk about it.
No, but I have to say, this is a very, very beautiful and very lucky moment, because we were actually in all the three different teams. We have a central catchment, eastern and western catchment teams, and I was maybe the most crazy guy in these teams, and I said we have to come up with some pilot projects, and I want to work on this Bishan Am Mokyo Park. So I brought a small team. I still have pictures from that time, and actually one person who was at NParks is now part in our Singapore Rambo Studio Dreiseitl team. When I say ours, it's not mine because I stepped out, but they are great guys. They do fantastic work. Some are sitting also here. And what actually happened after 1 week working in Bishan Am Mokyo Park, at that time it was called Bishan Park, in a red shed, no air condition, from early morning to late evening with thunderstorms and rain and everything, and these German guys coming over. Wow, we were impressed, and we were happy to work in a place on real surroundings. And then we had, at the end of this week, we came up with a kind of idea.
So it was kind of a sketch of a plan. I don't call it master plan because I don't like this word. But so we came up with a sketch, and I had to present it to both CEOs. And Koo-Teng Chai was the CEO from PUB,
Yes.
and Lang was a CEO from NParks. So I presented this, and I still remember that, and I said, you know, the only chance to make that work is that you have to bring budgets together, that you have to make a seamless transition between river and park, and this is the way how you have to think new about management, about ownership, about structuring this work and all this. So they looked at me, and but probably it was not a crazy idea because they did send all the other peoples out, and then they had a private conversation with me, like here, like, you know, like this. I think we were 3 people, I still remember. And then they said, Herbert, this is an interesting idea. We just had a conversation between us. We would do this kind of thing, but only if we find the right team, and you have to lead the team, and you have to come to Singapore and place yourself here, and you are personally responsible as project leader that if this is not going right, you are the one who is responsible. So I had to put myself to Singapore. I started a team. Some of them are still now, like Leonard. And then we started in a very, actually in Chinatown, in one little street, we started these things. So it was very much about a 1-week workshop, a final presentation, saying this has to be done, and genius 2 persons from a leadership point who really understood at this right moment what has to be done, and they did break the silos. And I think this is a very important part, you know, to see forward in a way that my KPIs are not the only thing. It's actually the entire movement which is important, and if we bring different agencies together, overlap it, different disciplines, we will have more than just 1 + 1. It is more than just 2. So let's do this, and we have the courage to do this, and we go into this experiment. It's a lot of courage, because it's also risky, but I think they made the right step. And I'm sometimes a little angry, you know, when, for example, people blame ABC for any floodings. I think there was Orchard Road was flooded. So newspapers said, you know, ABC, and it has nothing to do with ABC because this flooding was actually even on a place where there's no any ABC project was realized. So
Maybe we should convince Ting Chai and maybe URA that perhaps we could do a vision park in Orchard Road. After all, we can get rid of the traffic in Orchard, it's not required, and that we do have a canal running all the way down. Maybe we could do that, and maybe Orchard Road would be rejuvenated. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean things, you know, like the Bishan Amokyo Park has a very special condition you don't find everywhere. But the principle can be done everywhere. I can see many times, you know, when I'm driving through Singapore, I say, my goodness, it could have been done better. So it was already, Singapore had already more courage, maybe 5 to 10 years ago than now. Sometimes I find, lost opportunity. Just outside of you know, where I live, at NOS, close by, there's just one canal. I know the reasons because there were floodings on the motorway, but there's a park beside, and now again they just make a big concrete canal. I say, my goodness, why not make it different? Why not make a seamless transition between the park and this, and then it would be so much better. So there are many opportunities we often don't take for granted, and we don't take the step. I would like to see more courage in Singapore. Because I think it was said already before that I think the older generation made a big effort to bring Singapore to that what it is. And I think everyone can be proud about Singapore, how we are a role model for many other cities, also in Asia. But I think we should not rest on this. I think we have to be brave enough and bold enough to really go forward. And I think people like you and others have the capacity to really move things forward. And I think we need the opportunities. I think new generations need opportunities where you really can do things. And if we don't get the opportunities, then things will not change.
Okay. Maybe we should open the discussion to the floor. Anyone has got questions for Herbert?
Or for
Yes,
both of
Leela.
us.
I've got two comments. The first is that the word turbulent times, we hear the words disruptive, turbulent, that's the kind of things that we get these days. But we also have this resilience. And for millions of years, it's nature that has survived. So now we look into nature-based solutions. And I think the answer to resilience would be to look at nature-based solutions. So I would like Herbert to comment on it. And the second one is I'm more optimistic than Mansam. I don't get panic attacks simply because we see around in Singapore. We started off. We have this biophilic hospital.
Yeah.
We have biophilic hotels. We have Bishan Amokyo Park. We have schools like Commonwealth, secondary school with 2 ecosystems in there. We have offices all full of greenery, vertical greenery. So even LTA has come in, BCA. So I think we need everybody because we are affected. How do I make my life better? So everybody should come up with solutions themselves, and then they would then generate ideas. No point us thinking of how do you incorporate biophilic designs into this building, that kind of environment. I think all of us should take that responsibility and do something about it. That's the challenge we want to put to Singaporeans and the people of the world. Thank you. Perhaps you can comment on that.
Maybe just about the nature-based solutions. I mean, nature-based solutions were basically for millions of years working on this planet, right? And if we think about our engineering solutions, they are how old? 50 years? Some years more, maybe, but not more. It's like in a time zone. It's less than a second of a fly. I mean, you know what we do as engineers, how do we organize our cities? And I think it is also that we see now that, especially when it comes to water and to climate and to for example, temperatures in cities, that we see that with only hard engineering solutions, which are not using nature into the performance, we actually have no chance. I think we have to bring nature-based solutions back into our also dense cities. And it can be done. We have all this experience and all these examples. We can do much more, I think. And we can actually be bold enough and smart enough actually to let nature do the job. And we just bring the frame conditions. And of course, there is a kind of partnership between our human culture and how we work and how nature is doing things. But we have to change also a little bit our behavior. I mean, there's a lot of things what we can do different, still having a very good and decent life. For example, giving up certain ways of using all the time our cars. And we just had this morning a workshop about, how can we make a university campus and One North, for example, better so that people do much more walking and that we bring more nature-based solutions into this place. There's lots of opportunities what we can do better.
There were 2 questions, right?
Yeah, there was a second part.
There was
I
a
forgot
second.
maybe the second part.
No, the second one is inviting people to,
Okay. Yes. I think the second one was about how do you have people committed to and probably sing the same song as well.
Yeah, to sing the same song is actually, I think the same song means that you first have to know what's the music. And actually to also make people aware that this is a beautiful music and that you start to let people learn to sing, because otherwise you cannot join in. And this is actually why I think it is so important to bring, for example, very small kids already more close to nature. When I started Bishan and Mokyo Park, I remember that a lot of the parents said, "Don't touch, it's dirt." No, I mean, for example, It's not dirt, it's earth, and it's actually the mother for all life, for all plants and lots of things. So it's a change of mindset, and I think it's a kind of education. I think that's why this example, for example, touchscreen, it's a very good initiative. These kind of things have to be done much more.
It's true, though. I think, in fact, actually, Australia has got one of the biggest problems about peanut allergies in kids. And I think they realize that the kids, you may have think that Australian kids actually play with mud and dirt. They actually don't. They're more city kids than you think. And actually just getting kids dirty and playing with nature helps a lot in getting all the good bacteria in them. Okay, can we have the next question?
William Lau, architect and planner. Herbert, you talk about Bishan Park, and Mansan, you talk about new river streams or something like Bishan Park in Orchard Road. I want to dig your brain. We have so many state lands that are lying around barren and a lot of missed opportunity. How do you think we can navigate through the system so that we put these state land to better use? That's my question number one. Question number two is you show us picture of the container, the two containers stack up with a greenhouse on top of the building. May I ask, in that situation, how do people in the city navigate around? Because in Singapore here, immediately URA will come after us. After that, BCA will bring the hammer and hammer them down. So how could that have happened?
Well, to the first point, I think I just relate maybe also to our workshop. You know, we had, today we just had a workshop about different places on campuses, and we were just looking only a little bit on the study, only even in a short term of a workshop. There are so many places, so many areas where you can do things. And it's, for example, also how to bridge things, how to bring green connections from one side to the other, how to actually also restructure places, because some of the old buildings we can use, but maybe there's also some areas which have new housing or new density, so we can work much better with the open space, with green, also on different layers. I mean, he did write a wonderful book about how to bring density of green better into cities. So I cannot even answer your question so general. I probably need to go into a lot of details. But I think in Singapore you have so many opportunities, so many places where things can be done. And I think the key is that environment and landscape should not come at the end. It should come at first.
My reference is to the unutilized state land.
Yeah.
There's a lot of barren, wasted state land that are doing nothing.
That's right. That's right. We have just one example which is actually a placeholder for a future development for maybe a school or something. I think these places could have an interim function, and it could be much better used for green, for a park, for trees, and so on. And the fear is always that if a green comes in, then you cannot bring a building in because people are so much used to this green, which I think is not right. But I think things should be used much better, and this like bare land which is doing nothing, I think is not a good idea. So I would take much more activity of, making things really work. But we should go more into these details.
Yeah. But if I'm not wrong, the interim use of state land is something that you can propose to the government, I think, and that if it's a certain direction that they are happy to take, I think they're quite agreeable to it, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. Isn't it the case?
Well, I'm just thinking of one case where we are just having a kind of workshop or thinking on an area. I will not say which area it is, but there is actually beside an HDB building and some private housing, there's a quite big terrain which is completely fenced off and filled up with soil to a certain height, because the
standard is to be so and so high over sea level, which I think is also sometimes a bit stupid, because it should be a little bit more flexible. This place is fenced off and it's just empty. No one can use it. People from ABC are looking down and saying, green, no one can go there. And it would be so much better to use this place.
I think for me, if I do see some state land, what I get offended is when they have signs that say do not use, or I think this, I'm not sure they have that anymore, but I think that's been removed now.
No,
they used to have.
It's still there.
Really? They still have the sign?
Sign, fence out, no one can go in.
I think that is a little bit of a sad thing. Any other questions for anyone? Yes, Helen.
Hi, my name is Helen Smith-Yo. This is actually more a comment than a question. I wanted to come to this lecture because I saw the word beauty. And I was interviewed by Landscape Architecture Australia in the beginning of this year, and the title of the interview was Engaging Beauty. So for a long time, I felt a little bit of an idiot for thinking and talking about beauty and nobody else was. So I am really happy to see that word in your title of the speech. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it needs the courage actually to bring beauty into the discussion, but I think it is very important because, one thing is KPIs maybe, but another thing is if things are really very well done and beautiful, it is a driver also for people to behave different. I give you one example. I was seeing that parks which are really done beautiful and well designed, even in countries which don't have so much, I think, social control, like here in Singapore, maybe like Germany or in US. I have seen places which are really good designed. There's much less vandalism than on other places which are not designed very nice, which are ugly. People don't care because people feel not connected to a place which is beautiful. You feel stronger emotionally that you feel this is beautiful. It relates to my feeling. And I feel responsible to keep it beautiful. And people are much more willing to do things. I just take that one example. Bishan Amoyo Park has park parts now where volunteers take part. For example, a butterfly garden is beautiful and people really love it and they care for that.
I completely agree with you because part of the thing that drives me is that I think life is already so hard that I want something that lifts my spirit. And if it can lift my spirit, maybe it can lift the spirit of somebody else, simply put.
Do we have any other questions? Yes?
Hi, I'm Karthik, Director of Master Planning in Drumwall Studio Dreiseitl. I just have a question because you said you don't like the word master planning. I'm not offended, though I'm a master planner. I just want to understand what's your thinking behind what a master plan is. Because good master plans are led by a really good process of co-creation. And we've done that in Kallang Riverside ourselves. So I'm just curious when you said you don't like the word master plan.
Yeah, I can actually explain that we have often words which are a little bit from the past, and also a lot of our thinking and sometimes our KPIs are always backward orientated. What was yesterday right, we use it for our future, which is a big problem in all our education and so on. And I don't like the word master plan so much because I see that the new trends in cities is more, and I know very much about where you come from and what you do, so probably this is not a good, it's not actually based on you person, but I see a lot that we also have in many times we make these master plans in a way that we make them too hard, that we fix something on a plan, on a paper, like zoning, which is just very strict and very sort of regulating something which gives very little flexibility and which not allow actually the change process of something we don't know yet. So I like much more cities who are coming up with different concepts
like step programs or more development plans or more like roadmaps where you want to go and always adjust it to a new situation or maybe a new generation, a new question coming in. And I also think from a process, a master plan is basically, I think, a little old-fashioned because here's the master and I tell the kids and the students what to do, right? I think this old mastership is in our society all starting to change. Co-creation is much more important. So it's not one who knows the right thing. It's more that the society is getting a consensus where we want to go. And I think that's a different model. It's not anymore the old-fashioned master. I'm not saying something against, masters are wonderful, but we don't have this kind of master types anymore in our society, which is also a kind of the new way of how we get consensus in our group. So that's why I'm thinking as on a philosophical side and also on a practical side, probably we need to find a different vocabulary.
I agree that the word master plan is not a good word, and I'm totally against that. In fact, I have been using the word blueprint instead rather than master plan. And I think it's a different, it's blueprints is like a framework. Yeah. And the other takeaway from your lecture today is I like the idea of designing landscape first before you put building. And I think that would be a more human and more learning from nature way of doing things, to design the landscape first. And then the leftover spaces, we put buildings on it.
Sure, we need also.
But I think the point about the master planning thing is, I think we have been, it's written in my book, the fact that all our master plans that we see in China and India are actually such old-fashioned ideas. And you can see within 25 years, China has destroyed their very old cities that they have and replaced with nothing but just highways and major streets that simply create buildings as islands surrounded by vehicles. And it's so impossible for you to get one block to another. And that is one of the worst things about the modern contemporary cities in China. And I think that for me is very, very sad. And I do like the direction of designing the landscape first, and then after that we populate with buildings if we need to have buildings. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
I'd just like to point out that blueprint is also a blast from the past. So,
let's find a new word then.
Yeah, I'm thinking. I'm Henry Steed, landscape architect. Singapore aspires to be a biophilic city. I'm not entirely sure everybody really knows what that is, but I'm assuming that it's a city that has gone a great distance to embrace nature and bring nature right into the city, so everyone is completely able to get close to it. But I feel somehow it isn't moving at this stage, and it's taking too long to get to the point where we can call it a biophilic city, or perhaps the world's first truly biophilic city. I was so happy when the Bishan thing was done, the Bishan River thing was done, because I think it was in 1985, I sat on a government committee called the Water Bodies Panel, which proposed the whole idea of breaking up the concrete canals and turning them into natural rivers. And I think that was probably 30 years before you actually did it. So in other words, it's too slow. My question really is, do you think we'll ever get a biophilic city?
I think this is a question I cannot answer. This is something you have to answer, really, or you have to do it. I think the opportunity, I think Singapore has, from climate, from, I think, the knowledge, I think also from the organizations, from the structure of policy and decision process, because it's a relatively sort of city and state where government structures and decisions can be done very fast. If I compare it to other European or Western cities or even China, I think all the instruments are there. It can be done and it can be done faster, and it can be done better. But I cannot answer the question if we ever will get there. But I hope so, of course.
I think for me the answer is that I agree with you. It's too slow to head towards the biophilic city, and I think we kind of need to turn up the dial a little bit more. And I think I have been telling URA that 100% green replacement is just not sufficient. It's not enough. The reality is, and I think through our work, Helen with WOHA, we did 1,100% of green replacement on a very small plot. And together with Dr. Anuj, we did a post-biodiversity survey and the ecosystem contribution it has on the city, which was quite interesting in the sense that for the little small plot of land, it was a low-grade rainforest. The building itself, by a replacement of more than 10%, was performing the role of the rainforest by half, by 50%. So the reality is that if we have twice of the building, then it replaces that, the same thing it would as a rainforest. So I think the reality is that we do need to dial up the number if we do want to get the effect of a biophilic city. So just by 100% green replacement is only a token. And if you go around the world now, you find that other cities are already emulating it. And if Singapore seriously want to push the agenda and try and differentiate itself from any other cities, which cities are doing, they're competing against each other. And if they do really want to do that and is committed to that, they really need to push up the dial and push it to such a point where it will really make a difference. And I think that would be my advice to the authorities.
I have one more thing to add. One is, and it's always easy to say, okay, the government can do better, which is right. Can. But I think a lot is the general society. What do we value? And I think, I have seen this on Vision of Mokyo Park. People were very skeptical at the beginning. And then when they have seen it, they said, why can't we do more of that? And I know a lot of people who come there all the time with their kids and walk through this. So we have to, I think, also get more and more the opportunity that a biophilic city is something where everyone wants to have that. And that is a change in behavior, and it's a change in values. So I think it's a lot about education, it's about a lot experience, it's a lot about how our kids already grow up. And I think this is what we really value, because politicians can only follow what actually the big society, what the society is doing. If they are protesting against it,
Yeah, I agree.
No
We should just start the protest and demand that we
Yes.
want more parks, and we want Orchard Road to turn into another Bishan Park. Do we have time for another last question? Could we have one more last question,
one
please?
last question. Yeah, there's someone here.
Hi, Prof. And hi, Mansam. So I probably feel the luckiest guy here because I've been like, it's been great.
He was in the water workshop.
Yeah, probably I was the last guy to visit Van Cleef Center before it was demolished or taken back. So thank you so much for all your lessons and all. So my question is, when it comes to choice versus price, everybody loves beauty, and in Singapore we are living in the first world, we all know. But when it comes to developing countries or places, or like Mansam said that, okay, we think like developing nation in Singapore. So when it comes to choice, that okay, I like beauty and I like that all the parks, all the rivers could be something like what we see at your back. But when it comes to price, are we ready to pay that kind of price? When it, okay, I can say that let's put all the plans to my 50-story skyscraper, but okay, am I ready to pay the price? Are the government or policymakers ready to pay that? So how do you justify, like you have been in this business since long? And yeah.
It's a very good point. Can we afford it to do beautiful things? Can we afford it to actually make things which are more biophilic and all this? And I have to say, yes, we can. And the very important point is this: there's always enough money there. There's always enough opportunities to do this. It's a question about priorities. And this is actually in a lot of the projects. I did a lot of the big projects, and they were usually not more expensive than other projects. They just had a little bit of kind of twist in priorities given to a different thing. And actually the value, the outcome was often much higher than on other projects. So I think this is one point. Another point I would like to just mention is to make things beautiful and also work is not a question about investing a lot of money. You can do it also very simple. We are just working actually in our studio on one project in Jakarta, where we actually found landscape and village structures in a most beautiful way, very simple, done by local people. And we are trying to find a way how to bring this kind of local structures of villages and also informal housing in some areas even, how to bring that into the new development by not making it all flat and building on, but using it as a kind of inspiration for our system and our water system. And there is beauty already there, and it's very easy and very cheap. It's not easy, but it's very cheap. It doesn't cost a lot to bring that beauty also to other places. And that is often, you know, what we are not counting. We always think something is beautiful, it must be expensive. But that's a kind of logic which I often, when I look at the details, I say, when I look at the figures, also when I look finally what it costs, I can say this is wrong. We always think ugly things are cheap, and beautiful things are expensive.
I think ugly things are expensive. Actually, one point to make is that landscaping is actually very cheap. It's cheaper than granite and curtain wall. So, and I think it doesn't mean that having more integrated landscaping in the development is going to be more expensive. You just have to prioritize, would you want a granite-clad facade, or would you want to have a little bit more integrated landscaping in your development? The cost is not the same. And the other argument that I always use with developers is that you think about, you pay so much to go to Bali, you go to one of these wonderful resorts, and then because they have beautiful rolling ground of landscape, and you think that all those landscape is not maintained by the hotel, you do need maintenance. So if you want a building in a city that has the same quality, you must be committed to maintain it as well. And I think that argument can be made in the city itself. So I think that's is how you make the argument. Beauty comes at no cost, I would say. I think that's the end of our session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Herbert and Summ, for the very lively discussion. I, for one, enjoyed the discussion of the ideas, the importance of doing good and exploring natural ways to coexist with our planet and our urban environment ecosystem. So for now, could we invite Mr. Khoo Teng Chai, Executive Director of CLC, on stage to present a token of appreciation to all the speakers, please. Mr. Khoo, please. So thank you for being part of today's event. We hope you've enjoyed today's lecture. For the latest on our CLC lecture series and CLC publications, do visit www.clc.gov.sg or follow us on Facebook at CLCSG. Thank you.